So it wasn't just within Gloucestershire, it was right across the southwest, but the level that he was operating above, we don't think there was many people in the UK above him in terms of his supply. He had the power and autonomy to bring in several hundreds of kilos of drugs at a time and then distribute them out to his customer base.
The sirens cut through the night as one anonymous address in London exploded under blue lights and steel doors. Inside, tens of thousands in cash poured into sacks, encrypted phones humming with messages, and luxury cars parked outside as though on display. One man moved nearly half a ton of cocaine through Britain's veins, hidden under the guise of a laborer, trading under the alias Boboku. The other called himself the Pablo of East London, flaunting his wealth online, convinced his empire would never fall. Both men believed they were untouchable. Both built empires on arrogance, ambition, and risk. But arrogance always has a price. This is the story of London's arrogant dealers, and how their empires came crashing down. If you think crime like this only happens in movies, think again. Subscribe now, because the next empire could be rising on your street. Before the headlines, before the raids, there was a boy, 15 years old, hidden in the back of a lorry, crossing into Britain with nothing but hope and a borrowed name. His journey began in Albania, a country he left behind in search of a better life. When he arrived, London became his new world. He found work where he could, building sites, small jobs, long hours for little pay. To neighbors, he was quiet, polite, and hardworking. But behind that image, something else was forming, a hunger for more and a belief that the rules didn't apply to him. Like many drawn into London's criminal networks, Elio's Nankaj started small, introductions through friends, whispers of easy money, and deliveries that seemed harmless at first. But every favor came with a cost, and every risk pushed him further into the shadows. By the time he was in his 30s, the boy who had once crossed a border for survival had learned how to move entire shipments across it. The transformation was complete, from immigrant laborer to the architect of a multi-million-pound cocaine empire. Every empire starts with an illusion. And Elio's Nanaj built his behind a construction site. To the outside world, he was ordinary, a quiet laborer in worn boots, blending into the rhythm of London's daily grind. But beneath the dust and routine, a different foundation was taking shape, one made not of concrete, but of cocaine, cash, and control. According to the Crown Prosecution Service, what began as small, local drug deals soon evolved into a vast trafficking operation responsible for importing hundreds of kilograms of cocaine into the United Kingdom, with investigators later linking Nanaj to as much as half a ton of the Class A drug. Working quietly, he constructed a national network, couriers crisscrossing counties, safe houses hidden in ordinary neighborhoods, and international supply lines running through Europe. Each connection was designed with precision, and each layer of the operation was another step separating him from the physical drugs he controlled. It was a system built on trust, encryption, and fear. The National Crime Agency would later reveal that Nanaj used encrypted communication systems to coordinate shipments and advise others on how to establish smuggling routes of their own, even boasting about his methods in coded chats that investigators eventually decrypted. His life was a dual performance, a construction worker by day, a criminal strategist by night. To his neighbors, he was polite and hardworking. To his associates, he was ruthless, calculating, and in complete control. And his success was written in luxury. Photos and messages later uncovered showed £40,000 worth of designer clothing, a £10,000 Rolex watch, and a lifestyle fueled by excess, symbols of the power he believed he'd earned. Yet behind that image of success, cracks began to form. Investigators traced cell site data linking his encrypted phone to his home and car, and automatic number plate recognition cameras recorded his movements at key points during drug deliveries. Bit by bit, digital evidence began painting the outline of the man who thought he was invisible. What makes the story more haunting is Nanaj's arrogance. He didn't just build an empire, he taught others how to do it, offering advice on concealment, logistics, and money movement. To his peers, he was a mentor. To investigators, he was a blueprint. But arrogance has a price. As his network expanded, so did the attention of those watching from the shadows. The encrypted devices he trusted, his greatest shield, were already compromised. Every instruction, every boast, every message became evidence. By 2020, Elio's Nanij's operation had moved beyond the streets, into the shadows of cyberspace. His empire now existed behind encryption, hidden behind a phone brand few outside the underworld had ever heard of, encrypted. On that device, Nanij lived a second life, under the alias Aboboku, a name that mirrored the nickname of his own son. It was his digital mask, his command center, and, unknowingly, his downfall. Investigators would later uncover thousands of his messages, selfies sent to associates, photographs of cocaine bricks and stacks of cash, and boasts of more than £1.6 million in profits. In one conversation, he bragged about supplying 500 kilograms of cocaine, describing himself as a man who could move mountains of powder without leaving fingerprints. Every word he typed was meant for trusted eyes only. Every photo was proof of power, not evidence. But while Nanij believed he was operating inside an impenetrable fortress, Europol and French cyber investigators were quietly inside it too. Across Europe, messages once thought invisible began flashing on investigators' screens, live, unfiltered, and time-stamped. As the network cracked, entire criminal hierarchies unraveled in real time. The device Nanij trusted most had turned traitor. His private messages, locations, and contacts, all laid bare. Digital forensics analysts would later describe it as a goldmine of evidence. The chats linked him to drug movements, cash collections, and logistics across Britain. Even his alias, Boboku, became the final thread tying the empire back to its architect. For Nanij, it was the moment his world turned inside out. The man who believed he could hide behind encryption was now trapped inside it, his every word, every image, every boast becoming the very thing that would destroy him. When even encrypted phones couldn't save him. Imagine what else police are listening to. Subscribe, because the next digital empire is already being watched. Every empire falls, not with an explosion, but with a single crack. For Elio's Nanij, that crack appeared in Gloucester in 2020. On a quiet spring morning, police stopped a man named Drayton Ginny, also known as Daytree. In his car, officers found 2 kilograms of high-purity cocaine, carefully sealed and ready for delivery. To the casual observer, it looked like just another mid-level dealer caught in the act. But to investigators, something about that arrest felt different. Ginny wasn't panicking. He wasn't improvising. He was calm, too calm. His routes were precise, his story rehearsed. Behind his silence, detectives sensed a larger machine at work. When his encrypted phone was examined, the signal led directly into Nanij's network. The alias, the chat patterns, and the coded instructions, all matched the style of messages traced back to Boboku. What began as a routine seizure of 2 kilograms became the first loose thread in a £45 million tapestry of crime. The National Crime Agency, now armed with data from the encrypted breach, began following every connection that phone revealed: couriers, stash housekeepers, money launderers, and drivers. Each arrest opened a new door. And with each door came another message, another face, and another name from the encrypted archives. Investigators called it Operation Venetic, a nationwide effort that exposed hundreds of Britain's hidden networks. But within that storm, Nanij's organization stood out for its scale and structure. He wasn't running a gang, he was running logistics, disciplined, led, and cautious. Yet even the most careful design couldn't survive its own footprint. A courier's car linked to a stash house in Bristol. That stash house was linked to another delivery hub in Birmingham. Bank transfers, burner phones, car rentals, all began to form a pattern. The same fingerprints. The same encryption key. The same voice behind the curtain. Each time investigators pulled a thread, another part of Nanij's empire came undone. Some of his trusted men fled, others flipped. A few tried to erase their devices, unaware that the data had already been captured. By the time Nanij realized what was happening, his digital fortress had become a map of his own downfall. Forensic analysts could see everything, from cocaine shipments crossing borders to cash collections timed with precision. Every encrypted conversation that once proved control now betrayed him. The collapse wasn't dramatic. It was silent. While Elio's Nanij's encrypted empire was collapsing in the shadows, another kingpin was rising under the city lights, louder, flashier, and utterly convinced of his own legend. His name was Shohen Ahmed, a 34-year-old from Tower Hamlets, East London. But in his own words, he was the Pablo of East London. Unlike Nanaj, who operated behind code names and encrypted screens, Ahmed built his brand in the open. His empire ran on attitude as much as cocaine. He controlled 3 major drug lines, all stamped with the same chilling label, killer. Each number was a hotline for addiction, dialed by users across East London, each transaction feeding his ego and his bank account. By day, he played the part of a businessman. Behind that front, he was funneling over £600,000 through fake companies, using them to wash the profits of his drug trade. But Ahmed wasn't content with quiet success, he needed to be seen. He filmed himself in luxury cars, dripping in designer gear, flashing gold watches and cash. In one video, he smirked into the camera, declaring himself East London's finest. In another, he said he was still rolling like Pablo. To his followers, it was bravado. To detectives, it was evidence. Investigators from the Metropolitan Police and the National Crime Agency began compiling clips, tracing the cars, the clothes, and the locations, matching his boasts to ongoing operations and unexplained wealth. Every moment of arrogance he uploaded became another nail in his case. But there was something darker behind the showmanship. His network stretched deep into London's boroughs, 3 lines, hundreds of users, and runners working shifts like clockwork. Every sale was another reminder of how crime had turned into business. The irony was chilling. As Alios Nanaj used encryption to hide his empire, Ahmed used a camera to glorify his. 2 men, different worlds, but both walking the same path to self-destruction. Detectives later described the footage as a confession disguised as confidence. One clip alone showed him surrounded by cash bundles, the same denominations later seized during raids. Another revealed a luxury watch, verified through financial records as a purchase made with laundered drug proceeds. What Ahmed never realized was that his fame had become surveillance. Every post, every video, and every quote was time-stamped and archived, cross-referenced with phone data and financial trails. The Pablo of East London was, unknowingly, documenting his own downfall in high definition. The final twist? The very footage he once used to intimidate rivals would later play in a silent courtroom, projected for a jury, his voice echoing through the speakers as detectives watched from the gallery. When the walls finally closed in, they did so fast, and without warning. In the early hours of June 28, 2022, a string of coordinated raids swept across East London. Sirens silent. Radios crackling. Dozens of officers from the Metropolitan Police and the National Crime Agency moved in at once. Their target, Shohen Ahmed, the self-proclaimed Pablo of East London. Detectives had spent months building the picture, tracing his killer drug lines, following his cash flow, and matching his bravado-filled videos to surveillance data. That morning, the illusion shattered. As the first door came crashing down, inside, officers found bundles of cash, more than £60,000, blocks of heroin and crack cocaine, and a collection of encrypted phones and digital devices. His empire, once protected by swagger and secrecy, was now scattered across evidence bags. In another flat, forensic teams uncovered ledgers and coded notes, the paperwork of an empire hidden behind slang, initials, and sums that only his inner circle could decode. Every name written was another lead, every number another crime. The man who once bragged about untouchable power now stood silent as police zipped evidence into bags bearing his initials. But while Ahmed's empire fell in London, the digital echoes of another kingpin were still being followed, Alios Nanaj, the shadow behind the screen. His arrest came later, after months of painstaking digital forensics. Investigators had sifted through the decrypted EncroChat data, tracing every order, every delivery, and every boast signed under the alias Boboku. When they finally moved in, the image of Nanaj's double life came full circle. Luxury watches, designer clothes, and encrypted phones, all seized in a single sweep. 2 empires, born in arrogance, were falling within months of each other. On one side, a man who flaunted his power. On the other, one who hid behind encryption. Both undone by the same enemy, evidence. For detectives, these weren't just arrests, they were revelations. Each raid, each seizure, each device recovered brought new insight into how modern organized crime operated, hybrid networks mixing digital secrecy with street-level violence. As one officer later described it, "They thought they were invisible. But we were already in the room." By the time the trials began, the noise had faded. The doors were no longer kicked open, they creaked, heavy and deliberate, as two men stepped into courtrooms that would define the rest of their lives. September 13, 2023, Snaresbrook Crown Court. The man once known as the Pablo of East London stood expressionless in the dock. Shohen Ahmed, 34, who'd once filmed himself bragging about his wealth, now faced the cameras of justice, silent, shackled, and out of words. Prosecutors laid out the evidence with surgical precision: the encrypted messages, the video clips, the ledgers, the drugs, and the trail of cash laundered through fake business accounts. The judge described Ahmed's conduct as arrogant, a man who saw himself as untouchable, with complete disregard for the harm his drugs caused. The same ego that once fueled his empire became the key evidence that destroyed it. When the gavel finally struck, it wasn't just a sound, it was a sentence. 9.5 years in prison. The man who flaunted himself as East London's finest would now trade designer jackets for a prison uniform. But while Ahmed's downfall gripped the headlines, a far more calculating figure faced justice in another courtroom, one whose reach extended far beyond East London. December 14, 2023, Gloucester Crown Court. Elios Nankaj, the mastermind investigator called the chief organizing mind, entered the dock surrounded by silence so deep you could hear every step of his shoes on the floor. The prosecution painted him as the big boss, the architect of an operation responsible for moving hundreds of kilograms of cocaine and orchestrating a multi-million-pound criminal network. Encrypted messages, seized cash, and seized ledgers all tied back to him. It was a mountain of evidence, and every single piece pointed upward to the man who built the empire. The court heard how greed became his undoing. How, even while his associates were being picked off one by one, Nankaj kept sending orders, convinced he was still untouchable. The judge called him the chief organizer, a man of serious criminal sophistication, who ran a large-scale operation with ruthless efficiency. And then came the verdict. 24 years behind bars. For the first time, the man who had ruled through encrypted screens now faced the unblinking eyes of justice. The courtroom fell silent. The gavel struck once more. Two empires, one built on arrogance, the other on control, had both fallen to the same truth. No message, no alias, no illusion can outlast the evidence. And as the doors closed on both trials, a quiet question lingered in the air. If encrypted empires can fall this easily, how many more are still waiting to be exposed? In the end, both men believed they were untouchable. They spoke in codes, hid behind encrypted phones, and moved millions under the illusion of control. But what they couldn't hide from was themselves. Arrogance. Ego. Technology. The very tools they trusted became the weapons of their own destruction. Elios Nankaj, the architect of a global pipeline, and Shohen Ahmed, the self-styled Pablo of East London, each built empires that reflected the same flaw: pride disguised as power. One hid behind encrypted screens, the other flaunted his crimes in plain sight. Both believed they were invincible. Both fell, not in the chaos of the streets, but in the quiet precision of investigation, data, and truth. Their downfall wasn't sudden, it was inevitable. Two empires, one global, one local, reduced to mugshots and memories. So, what do you think about their sentences? Were they enough? Or just the beginning of something bigger? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more gripping stories like this, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell. Because the next story might just be unfolding right now.